Most of us know clearly what a company driver is, an owner-operator, local, regional, and over-the-road drivers are. But there's a special type of driver that not everyone is familiar with, and that is an independent contractor or an IC. Today, we'll be discussing what these drivers do and who they are. Welcome to Trucking Tuesday. I'm Jen. I work in the office side of a trucking company, and I like to share about my job. Today, we'll be discussing the wonderful world of ICs, or independent contractors. So, what is an independent contractor? These are drivers who are paid by the owner of a truck outside of the carrier whom they work with. Most ICs work with carriers just because it's easier and more cost efficient to have a carrier who is established with a book of business, aka a line of customers, than to try to find customers and freight on their own. However, this means that the IC owns the truck, occasionally owns the trailer depending on what kind of business they have. They're responsible for the fuel, the insurance, the logbooks, the certifications, the driver's license, and providing the drivers in said truck. Most ICs do not slip seat, meaning they don't change drivers out. However, some do, or some change drivers around occasionally. A lot of ICs typically use teams, which means there's two drivers in the truck, which means the truck rarely has to stop, other than a little bit of lap over in between the two 11-hour shifts and breaks. So, why would anyone want to work with an IC? So, carriers can actually make a lot of money working with independent contractors. One of the biggest reasons is that they are paid somewhat like company or lease or owner-op drivers, meaning they can choose, in most companies, my carrier being this way, that the IC owners can choose to get paid percentage, meaning they get paid a percent plus fuel for the load, or they can choose to be paid per mile. However, what the difference is the ICs pay the drivers themselves, where a carrier is responsible for the pay of the drivers who drive for them. So this is a cost-saving measure because they're giving the IC owner a flat fee. Another benefit is that you're not paying health insurance if you're a carrier that provides health insurance for your company and other drivers. Another huge benefit is insurance. While there is some overlap in insurance coverage, IC carriers have to typically pay cargo insurance and trailer insurance if they're using the carrier's trailer, but they also are responsible for more cargo insurance, more coverage of the load, and they're responsible for the truck insurance. This is a huge cost savings for carrier. Insurance and fuel are the two highest expendable resources that carriers spend money on. So having an IC owner pay the majority of the insurance and 100% of the fuel saves carriers money. Another big benefit is if, heaven forbid, there is an accident which involves a major or total loss, most of the cost of that and the reflective insurance increase will fall on the responsibility and the shoulders of the IC versus the carrier. This is another way that carriers save money. However, not all is perfect in the world of ICs and carriers working together. They have to have a good, solid working relationship, meaning that both parties come together and agree. This is typically done in the form of a contract, which can be issued quarterly, monthly, half year, year. It depends on the carrier. It also depends on the size and length of time known in the relationship with the IC and the carrier. My particular carrier that I work for now has been working with ICs for a very long time. The carrier I worked with prior did not use ICs at all, so it's carrier preference. But it does give a huge expansion to your fleet, also with the option of potentially having expedited, since a lot of ICs do choose to run teams, and it can be a huge benefit to the carrier for that. So, drivers who drive for IC owners typically are at the mercy of their IC owners as to when they go home, how long they're home, etc. So if you're wanting someone to run a particular lane repeatedly, IC owners might be a good fit for that because they typically don't have their drivers go home as often as company drivers, owner ops, lease drivers, things like that. Even good lease drivers at my company typically go home once a month or once every 6 weeks. Sometimes ICs can be out for 12 weeks or longer. Doesn't necessarily do a whole lot for a home life balance, but there are drivers that want to be out there and do that, and the ICs kind of control when they go home. So if you're wanting someone to consistently run the same lane, be familiar with the customer, using an IC may be a very good purpose for that lane. Another thing is that IC drivers typically don't demand to be home, say, Friday night. They just say, hey, I'd like to send my drivers home by the end of the week. So home time tends to be a big selling point in using ICs in addition to company and owner ops and lease drivers. Now, like everything in life, there's give and take, and there are some negative aspects for carriers to use ICs. One, the ICs are responsible for logbooks, regulations, certifications, CDLs, their yearly IFTA stickers, HUT stickers, everything else that has to go along with the truck. And this isn't necessarily a negative, but it has a lot of trust to be set between the IC and the carrier. The carrier doesn't always have the authority to go out and inspect those trucks, and they have to trust that the IC is up and up on everything. Even any carrier, you're dependent on people getting into the office to pick up stickers, to pick up new insurance certificates, or you have to email them out. So there's still some give and take even with your own drivers. So there is that level of trust that has to be established. Also, there's no real way to discern how well the trucks are maintained. And if trucks break down on the road, this could cause loads to be late. This could cause a huge issue with customers because the load's late and you're at the mercy of the IC to get the truck fixed. Another, not necessarily negative, but sometimes a struggle point is the communication that happens between the IC and the carrier. Some ICs prefer just to have the owners or the people working directly under the owners in their offices communicate with the carrier, meaning the drivers have zero contact with the carrier whatsoever. Some ICs allow the drivers to call in if there's a trailer breakdown, if they're using the carrier's trailer, or there's issues with the load, such as a missing pickup number. Some ICs don't allow that, which means that if the IC is unavailable, the drivers may be sitting. So there's give and take, and there's pluses and minuses for both the carrier and the IC. In trucking culture as a whole, ICs are very popular, and they tend to work with a lot of big carriers. The carrier I work for is a mid-level size carrier. We're growing every day, and a huge addition to our fleet and the number of drivers and trucks that we have on the road is the ICs, because they are considered part of our fleet. Fortunately, most of our IC owners at the carrier I work for do a great job of communicating and allowing their drivers to communicate directly with us as dispatch and breakdown if there's problems, so we tend to stay on top of things. Some of the negatives in my particular carrier's instance that I can give you just from experience is sometimes we don't find out about breakdowns until 3 or 4 hours after they've happened. And while 3 or 4 hours may not seem like a huge deal, in the trucking world, 3 or 4 hours can be the difference between late and fees or on time and happy customers. So it's always give and take, just like anything else in life. ICs are going to be part of trucking pretty much for the foreseeable future, and it benefits the carriers in terms of financial sense, fuel savings, insurance savings, having extra trucks and expedited if they run teams. It benefits the ICs because they can run a small business, but not have to deal with booking loads, establishing a book of customers, dealing with customer issues, and then they allow the carrier to do that, so the ICs always have freight. Where do the IC drivers benefit in this. Typically, they're guaranteed a job as long as they do a good job for the IC. There's lots of IC owners out there. So if they're unhappy with one, they can typically move to another, just like company drivers would move from one company to another if they're unhappy. So like I said, there's give and take, plus and minus for both sides. But like I said, ICs are here to stay, and it's typically a beneficial relationship for both parties. So thank you so much for joining me on this week's Trucking Tuesday. I hope you will join me again in 2 weeks. We do Trucking Tuesday every other week on this channel. If you are a professional driver, first of all, thank you for what you do. And I'd love to hear about what you do in your job out on the road, what position you have if you work in the office. I'd love to hear about that too. As always, my friends, stay safe out there. Please respect everyone on the road, and I'll see you again next time. Thank you for joining me.